You put so much heart and soul and grit and grace into your campaign. You were defeated by Lindsey Graham. You know, it was so close, it seemed, in the polls, Jaime. What do you think happened at the last minute? What do you think gave Lindsey Graham the surge he needed to defeat you?
Well, I don't know if it was so much Lindsey Graham, Katie, but Donald Trump. And I think you see it not only in our race, but in races across the country in which the turnout was not the turnout that was expected. That was not the turnout that was modeled. He was able to, Trump on the top of the ticket, really got out a lot of voters that we didn't believe. Trump carried South Carolina in 2016. He had 1.15 million votes. I had 1.1 million votes this time around. But the difference was there were hundreds of thousands of other folks who came out and they voted for Trump. There were 900,000 people who voted straight party Republican in South Carolina. 900,000.
And were the same day voters, Jaime, that came out and voted in person on November 3rd?
Well, and that is the thing. So going into the early vote, I was up by 150,000 votes. So on the morning of election, before the polls opened, I already had 150,000 vote lead over Lindsey Graham. And we knew it based off of, our turnout models, and we saw who came out early. And by the time the polls closed that evening, he had over 350,000 more people who came out. And so therefore we ended up losing by 250,000 votes. And it was partly because of the Trump factor, driving voters out that we didn't anticipate coming out. We had great and strong African-American support here in South Carolina, I think 27%. But because of that, we expected we were going to get about 33% of the white vote. That vote total dropped down to about 27%. And it was partly because of this, the Trump factor.
So obvious question, but you must have been very disappointed, Jaime, to say the least. And I imagine you've gotten some sleep for the first time in a long time, last week or so. But, how are you coping with just the disappointment?
Listen, I am, Katie, you don't grow up the way that I grew up, and you allow things like this to put you down. I mean, I was the son of a teen mom who had a high school education. My grandparents had a 4th grade and 8th grade education. So I know what hard times are. Losing a race is not hard. Those aren't hard times. Yes, you are disappointed, but just like when I was a kid, I fell off my bike, brush yourself off, you get back on. Because that's what you have to do, because you have no other choice. And so, I'm not allowing this to derail me from thinking about this new South, thinking about making South Carolina a better place for all the kids that are growing up, because I have 2 boys, so I'm responsible for it, and I can't allow myself to feel sorry for myself, I guess.
Well, I think a lot of people are very excited about your future, Jaime. They were very excited about your campaign. And I want to talk about what's ahead for you. But I want to talk first a couple of things about what might have worked against you. Some people say, and I've always thought they need a rebranding with this defund the police. I think it freaks people out. I think people don't understand the concept of reappropriating funds to go to sort of community outreach and other things that would mitigate crime in certain areas, and go to education, help people, give them a brighter future than they might otherwise feel they have. So how much do you think that kind of progressive talking point hurt you during your campaign or at the polls?
Well, it was probably a part of the factor. I mean, Lindsey and his super PAC was running in that last few weeks. If you look at what was Lindsey talking about in the last month of this campaign, and it really was, he was trying to incite fear, particularly in the white middle class in suburbs. That's where I really gained a lot of traction, where many of my that swing vote, I was really gaining traction there. And Lindsey just started beating this drum that, he had this one ad that had a sheriff from Greenville County, which was one of our large counties, and one where he was doing not as well.
Right.
Huge county here in South Carolina. And it was the sheriff there. He was standing in front of a police car. And there's my face along with Nancy Pelosi's face and some others. And basically he was saying, oh, you know, if Jamie Harrison wins, there's going to be riots in the street and chaos. It's the same type of stuff you see them running right now against Reverend Warnock.
Right.
And, you know, again, it's the scary black man aspect, and there's going to be chaos and this and that. You know, I was very clear that I was not supportive of defunding the police. I think, you know, listen, I believe that, as you mentioned earlier, you know, we need to demilitarize our police. Our police should not be a junior army forces. We need to look at how we fund policing and make sure that we're also adding additional resources for mental education to handle folks with dependency on drugs and the like, because our police officers aren't equipped or trained in order to deal with those type of situations, but we ask them to do so. And so I believe that's where folks are really going with that. But, you know, your words are powerful. And the one thing that you know in politics is when you're explaining, you're losing. And you don't want to have to explain things. You want your message to be clear and concise to the point. People know exactly what you want to do and how you want to do it. But the Republican playbook right now is to tag every person with that. And it, you know, it is not helpful. I'll say that.
Not only with that, Jaime, but also with by the way, it's dusk here and the sky is magnificent. I wish you could see it. Maybe I'll show you this Instagram live. But, you know, socialism, the whole idea, you know, the S word, which I think is such a fascinating conversation, which we could probably talk about, and you know, for an hour, is this idea that, you know, democratic socialism, what young people see as socialism, you know, older voters really get quite nervous. And I think that the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, for some centrists, really did freak some voters out. And this tagging Democrats with the S word was quite effective, don't you think?
Well, in some areas it was. And, you know, one of the things that, Katie, I think folks need to understand about politics, and you know, in many ways people say, well, you know, the black community is not a monolith, or the Latino community is not a monolith. Well, the voting community is not a monolith either. And that means certain messages and certain words are actually mean different things to different generations.
Right.
Right? And it also means different things to different people coming from different regions of the world. And so we have to be cognizant of that, particularly in very diverse groups or states or communities. We got to be cognizant of our messages and how they resonate with certain people. And that's not to say that they're bad or wrong or whatever, but you have to understand the reality of the situation, which is this, that people hear certain things and there's certain images that come along. And are you okay with that? And if you are, then that's fine. But if you're not, and this is why understanding the constituency that you are running for is so important, because our communities are also not monolith. Well, right. What goes in South Carolina may go very differently in Montana, and may go very differently in San Francisco. And so, and that's okay, because that's part of what makes us such a strong nation, that diversity. But we have to understand that the messages are really can resonate differently in different areas.
Not only that, but it's so frustrating that there can't be any nuance, and you can't have a truly intellectual conversation about the direction of the country, or about a political philosophy or ideology, which is subtle and often shaded with different, you know, iterations of viewpoints. And I think everything becomes very black or white, you know.
Yep.
And these terms are used and I think actually weaponized in a way that is very tricky if you want to kind of have, as I said, a nuanced or complicated conversation about things. Let me ask you about speaking of that, the future of the Democratic Party. There's a lot of intra-party warfare going on right now with a more progressive wing of the party, more centrist. I think it's not helpful to Democrats to feel to seem so bifurcated, if you will. So a lot of people are talking about you running the DNC. So you may be in a position to really craft the messaging of the Democratic Party moving forward, Jaime. I guess two questions. A, are you interested in being the chair of the DNC? and B, if so, or even if not, what do you see as the future of the Democratic Party?
Yeah. Well, Katie, 4 years ago I ran for DNC chair, so there's that. But I'm willing to help this administration do whatever they believe I can be helpful to do and accomplish. And so if we hear back from President-elect Biden, he calls me up and says, Jaime, I want you to work with me in the administration in some fashion or work at DNC. I will take the President-elect's call and I will try to help where I can, because it's about building back better. And I believe that. We have veered off track over these last 4 years, and it's time to get back on track. And I have even more incentive because, again, being the father of 2 kids, you see the world that we are living in right now. And this is not something that, if I have to close my eyes tomorrow, this is not something I can say I feel good and comfortable about the future of my sons and the people that I love dearly. And so there's a lot of work to be done, and I'm going to roll up my sleeves and do whatever I can to help this administration get it done.
Not to pressure you, but I mean, do you think you could have the most impact, Jaime, as chair of the DNC? Or where do you think your honestly, your experience, expertise, and passion would best serve you?
Yeah, Katie, I bring some interesting skills, I think, and again,
I'm so sorry. My husband just
no.
called me. Okay. Is Jaime frozen? Okay. Sorry about that, Jaime. My husband calls me at the most inopportune time. Doesn't he know I'm talking to Jaime Harrison?
But as it relates to your question, here's some of my background, right? So I spent a lot of time on Capitol Hill. I worked in House Democratic leadership. My job was to get the 218 votes to pass legislation. So I know about bridging divides between parties. That was my job, how do you get 40 members of the Blue Dogs and 40 members of the CBC and 80 Progressive Caucus members and get them all to vote collectively on one bill to then send over to the Senate and then to the presidential to get a signature from the president. So that was part of my job. I know how to do that. I've done that for most of my life. I've been a state party chair. I've now been a candidate for office. And my experience growing up as a poor Black kid in South Carolina is also a unique experience as well. So I think I bring a lot to bear, and I can be helpful in many places. And so, if they believe that's the DNC, then I'm happy to work there. But at this point, I leave that up to them.
Well, let's talk about Georgia.
Yeah.
Obviously, we got a runoff going on in Georgia. Georgia represents the New South you told me about, when we talked before Election Day, turning blue, barely, right, for Joe Biden, now a runoff, which would change the makeup of the U.S. Senate. What do you think is going to happen there, Jaime, and what lessons did you learn from your campaign that might help those Democrats running in Georgia?
Well, I mean, one of the things I think it's really important is that they just got to push back on these things, and I wish, we were even more forceful. And I felt like we pushed back, but maybe even more and hard enough to make sure that you don't allow them to tag you with this mess. I mean, if they want to talk about defunding the police, ask them pointedly and directly whether or not they support President Donald Trump's budget, which cuts $500 million from community policing in this country. Ask them why these senators have refused to pass legislation like the HEROES Act, which would give states and localities billions of dollars in order to fund the police. Here in South Carolina, because of the lack of funding coming from the federal government, our police departments have had to cut millions of dollars from their budgets. But Lindsey Graham didn't do anything about that. And so you just got to beat them back with the facts of the situation, that they've been sitting there for months and they haven't done, excuse my language, a damn thing to really address the coronavirus. I mean, the Senate hasn't done any work. I mean, now Loeffler and Perdue have worked on their own stocks. I mean, we know that they focused on that. They could sell some stock, but they can't actually get a coronavirus bill in order to help those folks who are suffering in their states. So it's important that they do that. I would say that they need to make sure that they're doing some form of canvassing. If there's anything that and I don't regret it, because we were trying, given the information that we had, we were trying to keep our workers safe. But I do believe that being out there and talking to people and doing it in a way that is safe is important. You can't just rely on TV. You just can't rely on digital. You can't just rely on telephone calls. I think it's important to do that. I know Stacey Abrams has done a great job of organizing there, and I think just working with Stacey and the state party, I think is really important.
So what do you think the chances are the Democrats are going to prevail in these runoffs on January 5th?
Well, I think they got a 50-50 chance, and it's all about turnout. It's about turn. We know that Democrats can win there because Joe Biden just did it, right? So that's no longer a question. Can Democrats win in Georgia or win in the South? Joe Biden just beat Donald Trump in Georgia. So the question is, can they get their votes out? And that is the real important component. And it becomes much more difficult in a runoff, right?
Right. Because you don't have somebody who's really motivating people at the top of the ticket. That's exactly really right. Inspiring them to get out and vote or mail in their ballots. And what do you think? Exactly right. Somebody asked me on social media, what is the best way to support the candidates in Georgia?
Well, one of the things I'm doing is trying to help them raise money. So I've already raised $450,000 for the two candidates. And my goal is to try to get to $1 million by the time we get to January 5th, so that they can pay canvassers and have phone banks and send out the mail to encourage people to go and vote early. All of those things are really, really important. Making sure there's comfort captains at the polls, at the precincts, as people are waiting there for hours in order to cast their ballots. All of those things are important, and they're not free. You got to have the resources in order to do it. And we've seen how much money the Republicans have already thrown in to this race. I think they raised like $36 million in just a few days because they understand that this race is really important. But I would say, if you're in Georgia, go and make sure you volunteer. Make sure that you are that you do the COVID safe canvassing. Volunteer. All of those things are really, really important at this point, and encourage friends and family to go and vote early.
Yeah, and you can do virtual phone banking. I know that my daughter and her friend did virtual phone banking in a lot of swing states before the election. And I think, that can surprisingly have an impact and help people figure out a system and really kind of motivate them to vote too. And I think they're going to be doing that before the Georgia runoff too. Hey, what did you think about Lindsey Graham? I interviewed the Secretary of State of Georgia, Brad Raffensperger, and he told me that Lindsey Graham had called him to try to kind of pressure him in some way. something about signatures on mail-in ballots. These were legally cast ballots. I think some Democrats have talked about launching an investigation. I'm just curious to get your take on all that.
Well, you know, Katie, look, you know, we should not be surprised. Like, hello, that's what I was saying for 2 years. This is who Lindsey Graham is now. This guy is a hyper partisan. That the good old days of Lindsey Graham, the maverick, the guy who could work across the aisle, the guy who respected the, you know, Democrats and all. That's not who he is right now. This guy is in Trump's back pocket, and he will say and do anything in order to get further into the embrace of Donald Trump. And it's just sad. One of the things I want to say to Lindsey Graham is this. Dude, you got enough work that you need to do here in South Carolina. You don't need to call the Secretary of State in Georgia or in Nevada or in Arizona. Focus on the problems that we have here in this state. And then, you know, it makes me question, Katie, what other states is he calling into? I mean, he's a chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee. I believe if I was an elected official in a state and I got a call from the Senate, the chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, someone who's close with the president, it would almost feel intimidating. What are you trying to get me to do? Why do you actually care? And it's just sad. It's sad to see, and it's a disgrace. But this is what I tried to warn people about from when I was running here in South Carolina. He cares about everything else other than the issues that people in South Carolina need him to care about.
You raised an incredible amount of money. I think the most in the history of a Senate campaign, right, Jaime?
Yeah.
$100. But I'm curious if you feel like because a fair amount of that money came from outside South Carolina, if that might have actually, hurt you in the end or among some voters.
Well, I mean, this is the thing, and maybe we could have done a better job, but the bulk of Lindsey Graham's money comes from outside of South Carolina. And even furthermore, mine came from the moms and pops and grandpas. We didn't get big corporate PAC dollars. The bulk of Lindsey's money came from big corporate PACs. If you look at the average per person, Lindsey, I ended up raising $130 million. Lindsey raised $108 million. Almost 87% of his money came from outside of the state of South Carolina. Ours was about 89% or 90%. And when you look at actual dollars, we actually raised more dollars from South Carolina than he did. Mm-hmm. But in the end of the day, he's this hypocrite who's like, oh, they're trying to buy South Carolina. Dude, you sold South Carolina years ago. It's not like somebody's trying to buy South Carolina because you already sold it. It's just sad to see. And this is a guy who disregards the rule of law. He disregards so much. And we don't even know, maybe he broke the law here in this situation. It's just really sad. It's a sad situation. But my grandma would often say, she said, now, if you go and buy a bag of rotten apples, you shouldn't be surprised when you find worms. Well, there you go, South Carolina. We bought a bag of rotten apples, and now we see the worms coming out.
What is the most important lesson when all is said and done that you learned, both positive and negative, Jaime, about running for office, about putting yourself out there, and about really the state of the country and the state of South Carolina?
Well, I'm trying to make that assessment right now. But I can tell you, Katie, one of the things that has touched my heart the most, I've gotten, and I know it's probably now at least just recently over 100 messages from parents who tell me, and I see them when I take my kid to school or whatever, they said, your campaign really touched my kid, 7, 8, 9 years old, whatever. They would say, all they could go around and say, I'm Jaime Harrison and I approve this message, or they love your ad with your family and your son. And now they're interested in politics. And it made me think back to how I got interested in politics. My first political memory was, the '88 convention, Democratic convention, and Jesse Jackson speaking at that convention. Now, Reverend Jackson's from South Carolina, Greenville, South Carolina. Here's this black man, son, background very similar to mine, and he's speaking in this national audience, and he's talking about young people and how they can get involved and how they can change this world. And in retrospect, I sit back and think about, well, what if my campaign has touched one of these young people in such a way that it inspires them to decide, I'm going to run for governor one day. I'm going to run for Senate, or I'm going to run to be the president of the United States. This campaign was built to inspire people. And it may not have inspired the parents or the grandparents, but it sure as heck probably inspired some young people. And if we did that, then we won. And I'm proud of it, and I'm proud of what we were able to do. And I can look in the mirror and hold my head up because I know we put everything out there on the field.
And it hasn't discouraged you from public service. I mean,
no.
You would run for office again. At least that's what I'm hearing.
Well, maybe down the road, not in the near term. I have a young family, a 6-year-old and a 1.5-year-old. And it took a toll on them. And my wife is a professional. I mean, she's an inspiring author. She's an artist. She's a law professor. And so, she put her career on the shelf a little bit for me too. And so it's about focusing on them for a bit and making sure that they're able to live their dreams. I was able to live one of mine, which was to run for office. And I'm glad I did it. I live in a beautiful state, and this with some amazing people. But we still got a lot of work to do. We still got a lot of work here in South Carolina to get people to look past the DNR and just look to the nature of the person. Is this someone who's going to fight for you and your family and your community? Is this someone who has your best interest at hand? And there were some people who just pushed the R button and didn't ask those questions. And hopefully we don't suffer as a state because of it.
Well, I'm just so glad that we got to catch up because, I thought about you and wondered how you were doing and how you would assess what happened in South Carolina and what your interests, might be in the future. And somebody asked earlier, we're going to feature this interview in my morning newsletter called Wake Up Call. If anybody wants to sign up for it, you just go to katiecouric.com. And Jaime, I really appreciate your willingness to do these kind of crazy Instagram lives. I think a lot of fans out there. Sorry about some of the comments are just random and weird. And people ask me to turn off the comments. Sometimes I want to, but other times, got really smart people. Someone just says, we love you in South Carolina. You are the gold standard. And there are a lot of people from South Carolina who are commenting on this interview. And I think really, really appreciated, you putting your hat in the ring and, and inspiring a lot of kids who don't necessarily see themselves represented in the political process. I think that's so, so important.
Yeah.
And I
Well, thank you, Katie. One thing that comes to mind, and we're trying to find a time to do it. I got this message from a mom. She's a single mom. She has 3 boys, a set of twins. I think they're like 7 or 9, and then a son that's 5. And she's in the Army. And she said, she sent me a Facebook message, and we're not friends, but it came through. She said, Mr. Harrison, I don't know if you will see this, but I wanted to write to you because you inspired my boys. And she said, my eldest of the eldest of the twins, she said, all he can talk about is you. And she said, you may not know this, but you are such a role model to so many of these little kids. And she said, I have 3 little black boys, and now they have somebody that they can grow up to be like. And I want to thank you. And I reached out to her and I told her, I said, I'd be happy to set up a Facebook Live or something with them.
You have to call those kids and surprise. They'd get such a kick out of that.
Yes, So we're trying to, because she's, you know, busy sometimes. So we're trying to find a time in which I can do it. But you know, it's those type of things that touch my heart, and that's what's so important. And so you know, it's just an amazing thing, and I'm happy that I was able to do it. I put my whole heart into it every day, because you know, all I want to do is represent the people in the state that I love so much. And so either I can do it as an elected official, or I will continue to do it in my individual capacity. But I'm not going to give up. I'm not giving up on South Carolina, and I'm not going to stop fighting for her and her people.
Well, that's incredible, and you're so inspiring. And I guess I know I'm out of time. That's a perfect way to end it. But I just have to ask you one other question, Jaime.
Yeah, yeah.
Mad at me. I guess the question is, Americans, and I know everybody's like, this is not a news flash, but the polarization and the division is so depressing, and the anger and frustration and the conflict between people is so depressing. Do you see any kind of, way out of this, where the anger just boils over and people cannot even agree to disagree? They, you know, have demonized each other to the point that it just honestly, it sort of breaks my heart. You know,
Yeah.
I obviously each side feels righteous and right. But is there any way that compromise won't be a dirty word, or that we can focus on our similarities instead of on our differences? I mean, this is such a hackneyed question, because I think it's something everybody's thinking about. But what do you think, Jaime? I mean, are you
Yeah, I have spent a lot of time, Katie, thinking about this. You know, and I've tried to, one, let my life be a testament to it. So I've done, you know, even though I've been yes, I'm a Democrat, but that doesn't mean I automatically believe that Republicans are evil or bad or horrible people. You know, I often say is that even though we may take different paths, hopefully our destination is the same. How can we make South Carolina, how can we make America a better place for all of our people? And I hope that's the goal for everybody. And so I'm willing to work with folks who have that same mindset, regardless if you have a D or an R behind your name. You know, I wrote a book with a friend of mine who, when I worked for Jim Clyburn in the majority whip's office, he worked with Roy Blunt in the minority whip's office, Amos Snead. And we wrote a book called Climbing the Hill, How to Build a Career in Politics and Make a Difference. And it was our perspective as two sons of the South. He's from Alabama. I'm from South Carolina. He's a Republican. I'm a Democrat. He's white. I'm black. But we wrote a book about our commonalities and the things that we went to Washington, D.C. to try to do, which was make a difference. Mm-hmm. And so I think part of it is it's about the people that we send to represent us. Make sure that the people that you send are people that you feel can bring us together as a community and not divide us, not tear us apart. When I was on, part of the reason why I used to admire Lindsey Graham was because of just that. Not because I agree with him on policy, because we didn't. But I agreed with the notion that he could work across the aisle and actually try to get things done. But now, you know, this is a guy who says, you know, the Democrats are nuts. And I pointed out in the debate, you can't bridge a divide when you basically castigate the other side as nuts. And I don't go into things thinking that way. And I try not to. And when I feel the urge or the frustration or the anger because I'm so upset with the other side, I always have to step back, because that's not going to get us anywhere. That's not going to make us move forward. That is actually going to drag us back. And we got to make sure that we send to Washington, D.C. people. I have what I call my grandma test. Am I doing and saying things that would make my grandma upset or anger her or embarrassed? And if I feel as though I've done something, then I know I have to stop that. I wish our politicians in Washington, D.C. had a grandma test. Will your grandma be pleased with your behavior and the words that you said and how you expressed them and how you treated somebody else? And I think if we did something like that, we'll see.
Yeah, I hope so. I think even just bringing a modicum of decency and the way you comport yourself, the language you use, the way you treat other people, it's pretty basic stuff, right? I
Yep.
mean, isn't there that book, Everything I Learned Something in Kindergarten?
Kindergarten.
You know, it's just basic, like the way you treat other people and treating people with respect, and hopefully that will start getting us on the right path, because we got to start somewhere, right, Jaime?
We have to start somewhere. We have to start. Yeah, it's almost like we need a reboot or a restart or something, but we really do. And I can tell you this, Katie, um, if I do get the opportunity to go and work at the DNC or what have you, one of the things I have to do, even within our own party, we got to stop all this infighting. There's so much more that unites us than divides us, and people get so caught up. They get so caught up in, well, it has to be my bill or no bill. No, it doesn't. That is not how our democracy is built. Our democracy was built on this notion of compromise. And I can tell you, there is not one bill that has ever went into the hopper on the floor of the House that went in one way, came out that same exact way. Never happened. And it never will happen. And that means it's because 435 people get an opportunity to put their fingerprints on it and make it feel like something for them. And that's fine. That's okay, because that's how you get some buy-in. That's how you make it a stronger piece of legislation. And so, but we get so people caught up, well, if it has to be my bill, or if it's not this bill, or I can't support you. Folks, life is not that way. If you approach your marriage that way, then you would be divorced the next day, because it just does not work that way. So why should we expect politics to work the same manner? We got to figure out how we find common ground, how we work together, how we do something that makes you feel like you have won and I can feel like I have won as well. That's how we move forward. And so I hope to be able to help facilitate that in my party. I've always tried to do that. But and I think that's where Joe Biden is. You look at him and you look at his demeanor the entire time he's been in this. Even when arrows were being thrown at him from his own party, he has always been that same even keel guy who's been trying to bring us together. He did that in the Democratic primary, and I feel as though he's going to do that in our country as well.
If you do become chair of the DNC, when would that be decided?
Well, right now the meeting is in February. When you have the White House, the president sort of names who they believe should be the next chair, but they still have to get the formal approval of the DNC membership, and so the meeting for that is tentatively scheduled for February, I believe.
Well, please keep us posted. And if you do
I will.
Head of the DNC, I'd love to talk with you again. Take care of yourself. I hope you have a nice Thanksgiving. It's going to be a hard one for a lot of people. But, no matter what, we have to count our blessings, even though a lot of people are going to have a hard time doing that this year, Jaime. So,
yeah, I know.
I know you're going to be thinking about so many of those in the state of South Carolina and all over the country, as will I.
Yeah, my heart goes out to so many folks. There's so many family members that are in nursing homes right now, folks who have been impacted by the coronavirus. So many loved ones have been lost, and, others who are still sick right now. And so, my prayers go out to everyone. But let's, folks, please mask up. The light is at the end of the tunnel. Hearing what we hear about these potential vaccines gives me so much hope, but we got to continue to being vigilant, making sure that we mask up, making sure that we don't let the coronavirus fatigue overtake us. Because I know people are just tired of being cooped up in their house. They're tired of not seeing their loved ones, and they just think, well, let's roll with it. Just hold on for a few more weeks and months, folks. We'll get this vaccine out there, and then we can get back to some form of normalcy. But I know it's hard, particularly in the holidays. but let's make sure that you can see future holidays. And the way that you do that is to be safe over the course of the next few weeks and months.
If you guys like what you see, subscribe right here.